What's happening? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRFTV. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the preview edition. We are taking a look at some of the graded stakes action from Churchill Downs on Saturday, June the 15th. We'll go over the 5 graded stakes races, not necessarily dive deep into them, but just give you some thoughts and some feels, some vibes going into those races. We'll see what the weather ends up actually shaking down as, because it looks like there might be some thunderstorms in the forecast. But nonetheless, we'll go over these races. However you listen to this, thank you for doing so. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. However you listen, please rate, review, and subscribe. Questions, comments, or concerns beneath the video player on YouTube or directly to me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. No, I'm not recording this in a library, and I'm also not in an underground bunker. I'm in a hotel in Louisville. I'm trying to be respectful to the neighbors, so I'm not speaking too loudly. Getting ready for the Stephen Foster show tomorrow night, NBCSN at 8:30. So part of the reason I'm not going to give you picks is because of that. You're going to need to go over there and check that out. But also because I still have a little bit of work that needs to be done. And again, that weather forecast is a little bit on the odd side. So the reason I am in a much quieter tone than I normally am at my little home office is because of that reason. I'm sure AJ and the folks back in New York, if it's too loud or too soft, rather, they can crank it up a little bit, or you on your computer or however you listen to this thing, you can crank it up. Also, the reason that there is no visuals, that this is just going to be audio only this week. Just can't bring everything along on the road. So let's go through, take a look at some of these races, just give you some thoughts and some opinions. Only going to go over the graded stakes races. The 5th, the Matt Win, the grade 3 race for 3-year-olds, 8.5 on the main track. There's not a ton of speed in this race. I think everyone's going to look at Mr. Money for a number of reasons. How productive that Pat Day mile has been thus far. How awesome he looked that day. To me, though, that was part and parcel because of the turn back to a one-turn configuration. I feel like he might be a big player in races like the H. Allen Jerkins over the summer and going forward in those sort of 7 furlong one-turn miles. Not suggesting he can't win this race. I personally prefer him more at the one-turn variety, though, and that's, you take a look at some of the other horses in here. I suppose Proverb is going to be forwardly placed along with Knicks Go or K-Knicks Go, but neither of them really get me going. I found it very interesting that Nolo Contesto was shipped here for John Sadler, and I know Gift Box, maybe he just needed a friend to come along with him, but there's a grade 3 race out at Santa Anita on Sunday afternoon for 3-year-olds. Nolo Contesto very easily could have stayed home and run in that race. Instead, he comes here to Churchill Downs to run in this spot. It feels like a nice starting off point for a horse that, if you've listened to any of these things in the past, I'm a big fan of Nolo Contesto. I think he's going to turn into a nice horse. He's paired up by our tops of 88. I think you might be looking at the forward move here. If I had to make a pick in here, as much as I do like Mr. Money, I wonder if he'll be better at one turn. I would go with Nolo Contesto in the 5th at Churchill on Saturday night, the grade 3 Matt Win. Move on to the Wise Dan. This is going to be one of the 3 races covered on the NBCSN show. Mile and 16th on the grass. This is a really nice field. You've got some interesting horses coming into this thing, especially coming off of long layoffs. You get a horse like It's in the Post, who, again, anyone that's paid attention to our stakes previews over on video.drf.com or anywhere else knows how much I think of It's in the Post. I think he's a really talented horse, but boy, it feels like he took his game to the next level at longer distances, and we haven't seen him since August of last year. To me, this feels like nothing more than a means to an end. Maybe this is just an instance where you get a race into him, you get him back to Del Mar, you get him ready for a race like the Eddie Reed or the Del Mar Handicap or whatever it may be, but you got to start somewhere, and maybe that's what this is, just kind of shaking the rust off. You could look at some other logical horses like Inspector Lindley. I don't want to say I've never been a big fan of his. I don't totally trust him. I'm not totally convinced that he is really of the upper echelon. And again, he might just be one of those horses for Shug. As they get older and older, they just continue to improve. But I don't know that I need him at a short price in a race like this. Maybe I'll pick him, maybe I won't, who knows. Admission Office, the horse that ran second to Catholic Boy in the Dixie, he's interesting coming from off the pace. Showed a little bit of versatility 2 starts back, where maybe he can be a little bit closer to the pace if it doesn't develop. It really is. It's just kind of a wide open race. Bourbon Resolution is a wild card trying turf for the first time. El Picaro for Nacho Correas and Javier, a bit of a wild card. Don't know what this horse will look like first time in the States. I think the horse that I'm most intrigued with right now, I don't want to say again, he's not going to necessarily be the pick, but the one I'm most intrigued with at the moment is March to the Arch. Got a little bit more tape to watch, but it's an instance where I thought he ran really well against better horses in that Turf Classic most recently. A scenario where Class Relief this time around, the run 2 starts back was really solid. I know it was a Florida bred stakes race down at Tampa, but he's always hinted at a horse that's got some big ability. Now, maybe he's just a horse that really fires fresh off the bench. You go through and take a look at his 2 most recent layoffs. He's come back and he was a winner both times off of that. But again, I don't want to totally say that I'm going to marry myself to him, but March to the Arch is an intriguing candidate in this spot for me. That would be the Grade 2 Wise Dan, the 6th race. We move on to the 2 big races, the co-headliners, let's call them, the Fleur de Lis and the Stephen Foster. The Fleur de Lis is the 7th race, 9 furlongs on the dirt. No real shocker in here. I mean, the class of the field is elate. The question now is this the same elate that we have come to grow and know what she's all about? I thought her 2 races at Oaklawn were pedestrian at best. I just didn't think she really ran all that well in either of them. I gave her the Azeri, said maybe she needed a race. Well, she came back, and I thought she was just sort of blah in the apple blossom. Now, look, she's Midnight Beast, who came back last weekend at Belmont and made that race look very, very solid. But at the same time, I go back to that personal ensign where her and Abel Tasman just put on an absolute show. Abel Tasman was never the same after that, and I wonder if the same is going to go for a late at a short price. I'm probably not going to be ending up on her just because, again, I don't know that the value's there, and I don't know that she can still run the way that she once did. Not saying that she can't win this race, but at the price she's likely to be, it just doesn't really do much for me. Blue Prize, I can understand folks that look at her. She's got a beautiful record at Churchill Downs at La Troyenne. You figure she needed a race off the bench. Second off, she takes a step forward. She ran well here in the Breeders' Cup last year. She won the Spinster at Keeneland. Keep in mind, that was the day that she was about 15 paths off the rail when she floated out down the lane. She makes sense in here again, but I don't think she has any tremendous edge. I'd be surprised. I'm probably going to end up on She's a Julie. She's paired up by her tops of 96. I don't think this distance is an issue. She ran her eyeballs out in the Alabama last year. De La Troyenne was a gutsy effort. She went and got those horses that were in front of her. She had that nice prolonged stretch duel with Secret Spice. Second off the bench for Asmussen. I think she moves forward here. She also has the ability to be forwardly placed in a race that doesn't look like there's a ton of early gas in here. You know, I wonder if Skeptic from the inside, you have no choice but to go. If that's the case, She's a Julie Parks just off. If she doesn't go, Ricardo Santana can send She's a Julie to the front and say, come and catch me. She's probably where I'll land in the Fleur de Lis. We go on to the Stephen Foster. Now, look, this is, I know it got downgraded to a grade 2, but this is a grade 1 field. You take a look at these horses at 1 1/8. I didn't think Gift Box would be showing up here. I didn't think a number of these horses would be showing up in a spot like this, but here we are. Gift Box, obviously the horse to beat in this spot. The Gold Cup effort most recently, I thought it was good. I didn't think it was brilliant by any stretch. I thought they were just kind of going up and down, he and Vino Rosso at the end of that race. But any of his last 3 races make him a major player in this spot. A little bit of a quick turnaround, only about 3 weeks, but you have to trust what John Sadler's doing here. And this is a win and you're in for the Breeders' Cup Classic. So you can understand why this field is as large as it is. I think Quip, I've never been a huge fan of his. That run down at Oaklawn, it was solid, don't get me wrong, but over a sloppy sealed track, and it was a complete blanket finish. Usually those are the kind of races that I'm going to be taking a stand against. I got to do a little bit more homework on that before I actually commit to a horse. But Yoshida on the far outside, I'm not convinced that dirt is actually what his best surface is. I still think turf may be, even with the fact that he didn't run well down at Gulfstream 2 starts back. I thought his 4-star Dave, given the instance, like, okay, maybe it wasn't a great effort, but there was a good amount of cut in that ground. He ran a bang-up race over at Royal Ascot last year. He ran well, winning that Turf Classic last spring. And, just to all of a sudden say that he's a much better dirt horse than turf horse, I don't know that I entirely buy that. He can certainly win this race. He would be one that would appreciate some pace, which it looks like there's going to be signed on. Tom's d'Etat is very intriguing in here, just because this is a horse that, sure, no match for McKinsey. And yes, he was forward with a slow pace. He was down on the inside, all the places that you wanted to be that day that they ran the Ali Sheba. That would have been Kentucky Oaks Friday. But he's run well at Churchill in the past. He doesn't have to have the lead. He can go, he can sit just off, be effective. He is a little bit intriguing to me. A 1 1/8, I know he's 2 for 3 at it, but against inferior company, he just needs to prove that he can do this against the best of the best. I'm not holding that Pegasus against him. 2 starts back. Tenfold, I just don't love that Pimlico Special. I'm not saying I'm not picking him, but it seems rather unlikely. Seeking the Soul, I'd like them to get him back to one turn. I mean, to me, it sort of stands out on the page now that the ACAC and the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, those were his two best races in a long time. Having said that, though, from a numbers standpoint, he just rock solid. He just shows up, runs his race. If he gets a setup in front of him, he'll come with a run. Seeking the Soul, you always have to respect Dallas Stewart in these kind of races. Runaway Ghost, I guess if you're looking for sort of a wild card in here, maybe it's him. Leparoux takes them out. Todd Fincher ships this one in from New Mexico. He's really done little wrong throughout his career. The Keeneland race, I'm just drawing a line through that. Couldn't really get any sort of position early on. That pace held up that day. His runs at 2-turn, I think, are better than his 1-turn races. And he comes into this on the heels of a 5.5 length victory. And I get it. It was against far inferior company, but I do think it's an instance where perhaps you look at him and say, if you're not sold on any of the other short prices, Runaway Ghost can be forwardly placed. He's in good form. He's not that far off from a speed figure standpoint. He definitely needs to improve, but it's not like he's a hopeless long shot in here. And you draw Leparoux, who is clipping at about a 22% strike rate right now. He's a little bit interesting. Still have some work to do for the Stephen Foster, but I think this is a fascinating race. Can go a number of ways. And the last graded stakes race at Churchill, I should say, as far as the thoroughbreds are concerned, because I believe they wrap things up tomorrow night with an Arabian race, which I'm not even going to touch on that because I have no idea about any of those horses. The Grade 3 Regret for 3-year-old fillies, 9 on the turf. This is a really nice race as well. Visually, to me, there are two horses that make all the sense in the world. You've got a horse like Hungry Kitten, who broke the maiden on Derby weekend. I thought visually spectacularly, but granted, very, very fast pace to run at. From a numbers standpoint, doesn't really have any kind of edge. And to be honest, needs to improve to be competitive with some of these other ones. And Varenka, everyone and their brother saw that run from Varenka at Belmont when she came back for motion. She absolutely exploded home. Javier had her wrapped up for about the final 1/8 of a mile. Visually, it was phenomenal. From a numbers standpoint, though, she's a little bit light from a time form number standpoint, needs to improve. She does have the highest last out buyer in the field. I'm going to be curious, though, to see where she's positioned in a race like this, because when you go through the field, not a lot of speed in this race. And I think that's what makes a horse like Princessa Carolina on the far outside as intriguing as she is, not only because she has a number of speed figures that are fast enough to win this race, but it feels like she's comfortable going to the front. And I would assume the instructions for Brian Hernandez Jr. are going to be just send from the outside, clear off, try to back down the pace a little bit, and then have something where you can kick home. And obviously you're going to have a major tactical advantage on the big girls in this spot. But another really good race. It's a nice night of racing at Churchill Downs. Number 1, Winter Sunset makes some sense in here. You got a horse like Delta's Kingdom from Bill Mott, who each of the past 3 races has earned 74 buyers. You know, it's one of those instances where you can make a case if you wanted to get creative for some of these longer prices. I don't think it's a crazy thought that you could go out there and say, you know what, why not a horse like Hard Legacy for Norm Cassie? From a number standpoint, that most recent run in the Appalachian, sure, no match for the top 3, but you know, the 103 time form rating, that stacks up pretty favorably. Getting back to firm turf, maybe that's what she's wanted all along. So you can get a little bit cute, I think, in some of these races here tomorrow at Churchill Downs. It's going to be a good night of racing. Hopefully the weather holds off. Last I looked, looks like we got a chance of some thunderstorms rolling through. If that's the case, then obviously sort of everything goes kind of haywire. But it'll be interesting to see what we get from a number of these big names. Obviously, the Stephen Foster, that's the headliner or the co-headline event anyway. That just seems like it's a bit of a wide open race, with the exception, look, if you think Gift Box is just that good, then I'm not going to argue with you. I'm going to just sit there and say, you know what, take the chalk and go on with it, and maybe he'll stamp himself as, or I don't want to say stamp himself, but sort of reclaim a claim to being the best of the best as far as the older horses after we saw those big performances last weekend in the Met Mile. And as far as the fillies and mares are concerned, it may be a short field, but I think it's going to go a long way into determining what we do with a late going forward, or what we think of her. If you think she can still run the way that she did as a 3- and 4-year-old, or did that personal ensign, which is kind of my working theory, did that just take some of the starch out of her in a very similar fashion to the way it did with Abel Tasman? If that's the case, maybe she'll be a little bit vulnerable in a short field. Like I said, that's probably the one that I'm going to commit to at this point. I can't imagine not going with She's a Julie in that fleur-de-lis, but there's still some work to do with some of these other races. Thanks for bearing with me this week as far as the late pod is concerned. No video either. Next week, we'll get back to everything. However you listen to this, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, or Spotify, thank you for doing so. Questions, comments, concerns beneath the video player on YouTube, or directly to me on Twitter @Bernier_Matt. Wherever you listen, please rate, review, and subscribe. I will be back early next week. It'll be on Monday with the recap edition, going back, taking a look at some of these races for as much as we can, because unfortunately we won't be able to show too much as far as replay is concerned. But we'll dive into some of these and then get you sort of ready to go for what's still to come. Guess what? We're only something crazy like 3.5 weeks from Saratoga with this new shortened up sort of, or I shouldn't say shortened up, the lengthened Saratoga schedule. That's right around the corner. Del Mar's right around the corner. Just because the Triple Crown's in the rear view doesn't mean that the racing year ends. We continue on, and in my opinion, Triple Crown, get it out of the way. We got bigger and better things ahead of us. We got the summer meets. We've got Keeneland in the fall, and obviously we have the Breeders' Cup. We still got some time. So thanks again for bearing with me here this week. I'll be back in the sort of normal setup on Monday with the recap show back at home. Good luck this weekend, however you play, whatever you play, wherever you play. It's been the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show.